Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Peter. I have a company called Smart City Insights, and we are two people in the company. The other one is Veronica, sitting right in the front here. But we work all over the world, and I've been working with smart cities for the past 12 years, I think now, and work for Hitachi, so the big tech companies and cluster organizations, work on the Copenhagen smart city strategy and the governmental strategy. So kind of been around in this field for a while with different angles. So I'm going to try and see how do we actually do this in practice and give some practical examples of this as well. But before doing that, this is our office on the left. Not the whole thing, that would be nice. But it's a co-working space, relatively new in Copenhagen, called Blocks Hub. The reason for mentioning that is when we talk about smart cities, we talk a lot about technology, a lot about data, but it's also about working with different sectors coming together to solve the challenges we see in the cities. So in order to get an office in here, you need to work with the future of cities. So we have architects, we have Danish Design Center, we have consultants like myself, we have the city itself, we have engineering companies. So we have these different challenges that we work on and speak to each other, what's the latest. So I can only recommend, first of all, come and see us, and you can always contact me. And also to think about that, a place like this in Slovakia as well. So when we talk about smart cities, and is there a typology? I'm not sure. So the guy in the picture is a guy called Pascal from University of Madrid. And he's been working on this field even longer than I have. And he's saying there's kind of two dimensions. So one is investment in technology. And you see a lot of these cities try to follow the trend almost to invest a lot of money in technology. But maybe just for one project, or not even knowing why you invest in the technology. So he called them fashionistas, which I think is an interesting word. On the other scale, you have the ones that are more conservative. So they might have a lot of test beds, they test the technologies, they form new kinds of partnerships but never actually invest in the technology. And if you really want to do this, you have to do both. Reorganize, and you have to invest in the technology as well, and of course work with the companies in this process. So that's one thing I normally say. If you do a smart city investment, you have to think of multiple purposes and not one purpose. So I'll come back to that. Just a practical example of, so quite often it's about how do you define the challenge? Quite often these teams that you have in these different cities, they test all of these technologies and say, now we need route optimization, so we have gathered this data, and now you need to drive this route. We've seen that all over the world. That's something about bin sensors, and I think if you talk about the city center, it's a great idea. If you talk about driving large vehicles around the city, it's not enough. So one of the things they did at West Cambridgeshire Council in the UK was actually to sit down with the drivers and asking, what is the problem? What is actually the problem delivering this, and why are you stuck in traffic? They say, well, one is traffic, the other one is one-way streets, is roadworks, is all of these different indicators that's actually extremely easy to get data about, and they are the real problems instead of when the bin is full or is not full. So they use this and actually to calculate the route, and I'm not gonna, because I can hardly see the numbers, but between 300,000 and 400,000 euros that they were saving just after the first attempt of doing this. Less CO2, and they had to get less vehicles as well. So just a very practical example that you need to try and understand the real challenge, talk to the people who actually have the challenge, and then you start to think about what technology or data do we need to actually solve this problem. So that process is extremely important. Water, we have plenty of that in Copenhagen as well. And as you see on the top right-hand corner, this is about, I think, 5-6 years ago, this 100-year event where you get flooding, and then it happened again 2 years later, so it wasn't a 100-year event. So the city had to do something about this. And what we often hear, when I travel around the world to speak about Copenhagen, is, well, it's all about architecture. So you do these parks, and the park that is in the picture, it's a park during the day and it's nice weather, but if the flooding comes, then it actually takes all the water and comes into the streams, and it pours off into different tanks if you need that. And so how is that related to smart cities, except it's a smart idea? But where do you put it? And if you get a lot of water, what do you do with the water afterwards? So the gradient of the city, like Copenhagen, is extremely flat. Where does the water go? Where do we need to make these parks? What about weather data, warning systems, and these kind of things? So there's a lot of data analysis that goes in to feed the architects on how do we actually do this. So although it doesn't look like a technical smart city solution, there's a lot of technology and data going into to doing it before you make the solution. The one on the lower left is Frederiksberg, which is actually a municipality inside Copenhagen. It's permeable surface on the footpath, which means that the water actually goes through. Then you have a tank under there, and you have a sensor. When that starts to fill up, you can actually take that water and feed it to the trees and the plants. So everything again here is thought of, and you can start to do things again when you get the weather reports and say, okay, now we need to open for X, Y, Z. And all it does is like avoid getting the water down to the basements of the people. The last example is also due to something with water. So we have district heating in Denmark, so it's hot water. So how do you then actually look at the leaks in the different pipes you have on the ground where the water is hot? So this is from the south of Jutland, south in Denmark. And a drone can easily detect heating. So therefore, instead of guessing where the leak is, you can actually just go out and dig up and fix it. And now you're starting to measure, is it big enough that it's worth fixing as well? So, but you can do all of these kind of using technology. You can actually solve some of these problems pretty easily. So this is a traditional city operating model from British Standard Institute actually. So again in silos. And when the past 10 years I've worked in both in the cities but also in the companies, you go out and address one project, one problem, and you invest in this technology. But actually, especially when you talk about data can be used in many different projects if you collect that data. But the way the cities are structured and the way a lot of companies are actually selling these solutions, you do it for mobility, you do it for climate adaptation, you do it for energy, you do it for cultural projects. And as long as you operate in these silos, the investment you do in the technology is going to be a problem. I ran something called the City Data Exchange in Copenhagen, which is an external data platform with private sector data as well. And we talked a lot to the city of Copenhagen, but also Seattle and smaller municipalities to try and find out what information do you need in order to solve your problems. So we talked to the parking, the public safety, flooding, climate adaptation, tourism, mobility. And what we found out is they basically want not the same, but similar things. So the way they got their data was either from the same data provider or the same type of technology. But they used to just source this one by one, and then it's too expensive to get it. So therefore, there's something about the way you reorganize and you use these internal teams in the city to make the business model for buying the technology and to work with the data. And I don't have time to the second part, which is the private sector, because if you actually speak to the private sector about the same the data, they want the same information as well. So that's something we work a lot on at the moment. A quick example from this city of Copenhagen. I know time is going. So they have done this matrix where they go out and say, the first one say people and flow. And they say, okay, what projects are important where we need to know where the people are moving around and different things are moving around. So they basically went around to the different departments and saying, what information do you need? And then you gather that into different categories. And then you start to test different technologies that you then invest in afterwards. So again, it's one investment, multiple purposes that I mentioned before as well. And there's something you see more and more when you go around to cities around the world as well. So last slide. I'm not going to go through that as well, but I think Dublin is a great place to go as well to look at this, and even on their webpage. So the way they're structured, they've been structured like this for, I think, more than a decade. So they have the city of Dublin in the middle, and then you have the local authorities around it. And as you know, cities doesn't stop because there's an administrative border. So they have Smart Dublin where they say, okay, we have mobility problems, we have, if it's flooding, all these energy problems. It doesn't stop because there's a border. So they have this team with different types of experts from all local authorities. So every time there's a challenge, they check with the other local authorities as well. Dublin itself have the same one person or two, I think they have one or two, that's also checking the different departments to get the information to feed in to Smart Dublin as well. And they also have the test areas. And maybe one last comment about Dublin is they have developed the testbed testing technologies and partnered up with something called Enterprise Ireland, where you actually get some funding. Enterprise Ireland, which is a public sector organization, they co-fund 50%. The city co-fund 50% as well, but there's actually some requirements to get this funding from Enterprise Ireland, and one of them is that the problem owners have to be part of it. They have to be available for everyone who's working on the project and the problem. So I think my time is out, I can see. But thank you very much. I'm here the rest of the day as well, so please just grab me and ask questions.